Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Fighting Bob Fest 2022. I'm Norman Stockwell, publisher of the Progressive magazine. Welcome, everybody, to Fighting Bob Fest. I want to start out by thanking the Barrymore Theater here in Madison, Wisconsin, for opening their doors to us as they do every year for a Fighting Bob Fest event. This year, again, unfortunately, virtual, coming to you via the internet, but hopefully next year we'll be back together in person again. I want to thank all of the speakers and musicians that are participating in tonight's Fighting Bob Fest at a time that really is an important moment in our country, a moment of decision. The Progressive magazine has been around since 1909, bringing you news and information about progressive movements, progressive politics, and working for a better world here in Wisconsin, in the United States, and around the globe. Our next issue of the magazine, coming out in October, is focusing on the theme of what's at stake. What's at stake in our country today, what's at stake in the world today. And I hope that you will pick up a copy either on the newsstand or by subscribing at progressive.org/subscribe. And you can always check out all of our stories on the web at our website, progressive.org. We have daily content that goes up, and then we also have a bi-monthly print magazine. The Progressive also has two projects, Progressive Perspectives, which sends out op-eds to newspapers across the country, working to diversify the pages of our nation's newspapers. And then Public Schools Advocate, which reports on the attacks on public education from the grassroots, from activists, from teachers, and also from education policy specialists. All the content of those projects, as well as our magazine, is available on the web at progressive.org. And also, we only survive through your generous donations, so please, if you are able, go to the web right now and click on progressive.org/donate to support this work.
Hello, I'm John Nichols, and I'm speaking to you from the historic Barrymore Theater on the east side of Madison, Wisconsin, as part of the annual Fighting Bob Fest. And I've been involved with Fighting Bob Fest since its beginning 20 years ago. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of history and a little bit of the sense of why we continue to do this and why we think it is so important to maintain the legacy of Fighting Bob Follette and of the Progressive magazine, which he helped to found and which he loved. I'll first tell you that I'm speaking right now to a cameraman and to Norm Stockwell, who is the editor and publisher over at the Progressive, and nobody else. It's an empty room, and what a bummer that is. The Barrymore Theater is an exquisitely beautiful theater. I've seen so many shows here, and I think most people who are listening in probably have as well. But it is also the place where, for many years, Fighting Bob Fest held either pre-Bob Fest or actual Bob Fest events. And I have seen this space filled to the rafters, literally people sitting, on the sides, up the middle aisle, for incredible events in this space to honor the Follette legacy, to honor the Progressive, and to honor this Fighting Bob Fest tradition. And I wish you could all be here with us tonight. It would make it so much more in the true spirit of Fighting Bob Follette, who, in addition to founding the Progressive, was a great influence on the founding of the Capital Times newspaper, with which I have been associated for the better part of 30 years. And so let's talk a little bit about Follette. And this is what I would want you to know. Robert M. Follette was the most courageous politician of his time, and arguably the most courageous politician ever produced by the state of Wisconsin. And I don't say that to diminish contemporary politicians or to forget about some of the great people of the past, like Gaylord Nelson and others. I say it because there is simply no question that in the most difficult moments in this nation's history, Robert M. La Follette stood strong for economic and social and racial justice, for saving the planet, and perhaps above all, for peace. And that's an issue that so often gets left off our discussions of late. But the fact of the matter is that we live today in a heavily militarized country which devotes huge portions of its treasure to funding the Pentagon at levels that are exponentially greater than what other countries around the world do. We are a military-industrial state. And 100 years ago, Robert M. La Follette sought to prevent that reality. He did not succeed, but his battle remains our battle to this day. And I will note especially that in this fall of 2022, we are 100 years on from La Follette's greatest campaign. There are many people who think that his campaign for president in 1924 was his greatest campaign, and certainly it's what solidified and locked in his legacy. That campaign for president in 1924 was remarkable. Running as an independent progressive, La Follette attracted the support of what was then the labor movement, the AFL, as well as the NAACP, civil rights activists, prominent activists from across all the spectrums of the left at that time, and also from Eugene Victor Debs, the head of the Socialist Party. It was a coalition of the left that sought to challenge status quo politics at a time when the Ku Klux Klan and the extreme right was on the march, promoting an authoritarian approach to economics and to issues of social and racial organization in this country. And La Follette challenged that bravely, boldly in 1924. It was a campaign that really laid the groundwork for what would become Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. But I will still tell you that the most important campaign that Robert M. La Follette waged was actually in 1922, 2 years earlier. And that was a campaign for re-election to the United States Senate. And we have to set a little bit of the storyline here. In 1917, when Woodrow Wilson, who had promised to keep the United States out of World War I, was leading the United States into that horrific war, Robert M. La Follette led the opposition in the U.S. Congress. His opposition was bold and principled, clear-eyed and realistic. He warned that if the United States involved itself in that war, that it would lead to an incredible expense to this country, both a human expense first and foremost, the deaths of people unnecessarily, and then also an expense economically, that the wealth of this country would be steered toward the war profiteers, the munitions merchants, and all of those who would continue to promote war, not just during World War I, but in the years that would follow. La Follette was right. He was also right that World War I would, if we entered into it, and if we bought in fully to the mentality that Wilson and those around him were promoting, would lead to an assault on civil liberties at home. And it did. It led to the first Red Scare, which was devastating for immigrants, for people of color, for editors of progressive magazines, such as Emma Goldman. And so La Follette saw what was coming. He warned about it. Those warnings led to an incredible explosion of opposition to him, not just nationally, but in his home state of Wisconsin. He was hung in effigy on the UW campus. He was condemned by all of the newspapers in the state, so viscerally that one of his supporters, William Evu, decided to start a new newspaper, the Capital Times, to be the one newspaper that would support La Follette during this struggle. And La Follette faced the threat of censure, removal from the United States Senate. And he averted that. But when he ran for re-election a couple years later in 1922, his aides and allies said to him, "Don't talk about the war. You know, you've had a few years pass. It's become a little safer for you politically. You should be looking forward, and don't bring that up." And when La Follette announced his candidacy and launched into that 1922 race, he said in his speech, "I want to make it clear that I opposed that war, that awful war, and the assaults on civil liberties that extended from it. And I am proud of where I stood, I'm paraphrasing here, but then he said, and I don't want the votes of anyone who disagrees with me on that, of anyone who thinks I was wrong. And it was an incredibly bold statement, right in your face, a total challenge to those who had, sought to silence him, but also even to those of his political allies who wanted him to become more cautious, more safe as a candidate. La Follette refused to do that. And there were actually grown men who cried when they heard him say those words. One of them was a longtime opponent of La Follette who said, he says, I hate him. I don't like La Follette at all, but boy, what courage he has. And the fact of the matter is that courage was rewarded. In November of 1922, Robert M. La Follette was reelected to the United States Senate with an overwhelming landslide. He won by roughly a 3-to-1 margin, one of the biggest landslides in Wisconsin history. And it was an absolute signal that the people of Wisconsin respected his opposition to a war that the United States should not have entered into. He took the most courageous, the most dangerous stance, and instead of being punished for it, he was rewarded. I recount this story this evening because I think it's important for us in this political season, when we face so many threats that parallel the threats we faced in the past, threats to civil liberties, threats to freedom of the press, threats of war, threats to our progress toward economic and social and racial justice. When there are so many threats, we will hear people who will counsel us to be cautious, to go toward the center, to try and win narrowly. And I would argue that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to be as blunt and as bold and as courageous as Robert M. La Follette, to say that we will stand up to authoritarianism. We will stand up to totalitarianism. We will stand up to the threat of fascism in this country, and we will say no. We will say no boldly on behalf of all of those who face threats, who face intimidation, and we will stand strongly to say that in this country, the progressive movement fights for economic and social and racial justice. It fights for the rights of organized labor to organize and collectively bargain. It fights for the rights of people who want to save this planet from environmental destruction. And it fights against war and militarism at every turn. Brothers and sisters, we have so many opportunities, not just on Election Day, but on the picket line with folks like the nurses at UW Hospital who are standing up for their labor rights. We can step up in all sorts of ways, courageously, and we can decide that when the question is, which side are you on? We are on the side of peace and justice. That is the Wisconsin progressive tradition. That is the La Follette tradition. That is the Fighting Bobfest tradition. That is the Progressive Magazine tradition that I am proud to embrace and celebrate this evening. Solidarity.
Oh, Hello, everyone. Senator Tammy Baldwin here, welcoming you to this year's Fighting Bob Fest. I want to thank the Progressive for working hard to bring together Wisconsinites for this important event. I'm grateful for your commitment and dedication to fighting for the progressive values that we share in the great state of Wisconsin. It has been one of my greatest honors to occupy the same Senate seat as the namesake of today's festivities, Fighting Bob Follette Sr. The legacy of Fighting Bob is one that will carry on for generations because of his true commitment to working on behalf of ordinary people instead of the powerful corporate interests. He spoke on countless stages across the Badger State, spreading his message that came to define our state's progressive tradition. And the issues that Fighting Bob spoke of back then, they're still relevant today. I've heard concerns from Wisconsin residents that our economic system is skewed in favor of the wealthy, all while the issues and challenges faced by middle-class families go ignored in Washington, D.C. But the purpose of our democracy is to ensure that everyone, not just the wealthy, has a fair shot. I'm proud to be working on behalf of everyday Wisconsinites here in Washington, D.C., and I'm proud of the progress we have made in this past year. We took on and beat the big drug companies and special interests to finally lower prescription drug costs. We are closing tax loopholes for big billion-dollar corporations and are making them pay a fairer share of taxes. We are investing in the production of made-in-America clean energy that will create jobs, take on the climate crisis, and lower energy costs for Wisconsinites. And though we still have so much work to do, we must hold strong to the Wisconsin state motto, forward. If we continue to work together towards progress, we can offer those struggling to be heard a strong voice in the conversation. I am confident that if we stand together, we can make a difference and continue to carry Fighting Bob's legacy forward. Thank you, and have a great night.
Hello, Fighting Bob Fest. I'm Mark Pocan, and I'm really glad to be with you. And I wanted to just be able to share a little bit about my last 2 years in Congress and what has happened that Congress has gotten done that's going to be helpful for people in this country, and how it really is exactly in the vein of Fighting Bob as we're celebrating his great legacy once again. You know, Fighting Bob did so much for Wisconsin and for this country in terms of really trying to have public policy that focused on working people, the average person, not the special interests, not the so-called railroad barons and others that were out there. And I think we really did that this session. And, you know, it's been really difficult. We've had to swim against a lot of tough currents with the Republicans being completely unwilling to do anything that their cult leader, Donald Trump, didn't tell them. And make no mistake, the Republican Party is no longer a political party with an ideological view. It is a cult of Donald Trump. And whatever he says becomes what the party cares about. There's a reason in the last presidential convention, the Republican Party had no platform, because the platform was whatever Donald Trump said, didn't have to make sense or not, didn't have to have consistency. But that's the Republican Party we're dealing with today. And we get almost no help whatsoever from the Republicans. But let me share with you what we actually did. The Republicans are going to talk about all sorts of things, from Joe Biden's inflation, which unless he's the dictator of the world, there's inflation across the planet that clearly has happened as we've all reopened at once from COVID and kind of struggling to get out of COVID. When you have scarcity, everything, people wanting something at once, the cost of things are going to go up. And that's why we have inflation. Nonetheless, let me share with you exactly what we've done in Congress. So early last year in this session, we passed the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA funds you may have heard of. That put money in people's pockets, shots in people's arms, got people back into jobs, and got kids back into school safely. And for the first time, we got money to local and state governments. And thank you, Governor Evers and Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, for all the work that you did to help get that money distributed in a very effective way right here in Wisconsin. Then last fall, we passed the Infrastructure Act. How many presidents, at least 4 I can think of, we've talked about investing in our nation's infrastructure. And we finally did it. And we're going to create 1.5 million good family supporting wages for people in the skilled trades jobs through that infrastructure bill. 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations across the country, and so much more that'll be felt in every single county in Wisconsin. Then this year, one of the issues that we've been facing is a problem with computer chips. We don't make enough things in the United States anymore. Unfortunately, so many things are made overseas just to save a little bit of money on labor, when in reality, the labor we should be concerned about is labor here in America and making sure people here are making things. But we only make about 12% of the computer chips that we use in this country. And normally we have about a 45-day supply of chips. Right now we have a 4-day supply of chips. Well, the average car has 1,000 chips. The average electric vehicle has 2,000 chips. Clearly, you can see the impact of not making things here in America. Well, here's the good news. We passed a bill so that we're going to be making more computer chips right here, as well as other things that are critical to the supply chain. And that was the CHIPS Act. We passed that several months back. And most recently, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And that is a very big bill that got a lot done, from finally tackling climate change, reducing our emissions by 40% by 2030, to things like something I can't believe we've never been able to do before in Congress: allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices using our volume purchasing. That alone is going to save seniors and people on Medicare so much money that we're able to put back into the economy. We also capped out-of-pocket expenses for seniors at $2,000, a huge development in that bill. So we're reducing inflation by reducing energy costs and reducing healthcare costs with that bill. And most recently, the president announced the ability to get rid of some of the student debt that people have as we're trying to get people into professions that require college degrees. So we've helped people who are going to those jobs. We help people in the skilled trades with the infrastructure bill. We help seniors with the Inflation Reduction Act. We help small businesses with the PPP loans. You go down the list. At the end of the day, no one bill helps everyone, but at the end of the session, we should make sure that we're really helping the average American. And by the way we funded the Inflation Reduction Act was by making those who've often found ways to game the system and hide their profits over the seas pay their fair share. Corporations having a minimum 15% corporate tax, and taxing some of those dividends from people who do the stock buybacks that only benefits the most wealthy. It was truly a progressive session in the sense that Bob LaFollette would look, I think, and see what we did and be very proud of it. That's the reality, but the Republicans don't want to talk about the reality or the bills we did or the things that they didn't help us with. What they want to talk about is things like the border, things like inflation in a very incorrect way, and continuing the divide that they've tried to do to this country since Donald Trump was president. Look, we've gotten things done, but we have headwinds. There still is inflation, global inflation, but we're still fighting that. Fortunately, for about 80 plus days in a row, gas prices have gone down in this country. We're starting to tackle that. That'll help reduce food costs. I think we finally are seeing that bend turn, and we're going on the right direction when it comes to inflation. But, midterms are often difficult elections, and I think you're going to see a lot more misinformation from Republicans. What I wanted to do is just share the very progressive public policy that we got done. I'm really proud of it, and I think Fighting Bob would be really proud of it. And I hope if anyone raises these issues, now you'll know the truth. And thanks so much for being here, and on Wisconsin.
Hey everybody, I'm Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. So excited to be here once again for Fighting Bob Fest. Truly wish we had the opportunity to be in person, but I'm so honored to serve as your Lieutenant Governor, and I'm very honored to be joining you all virtually for the 21st Annual Fighting Bob Fest. I'm always excited to celebrate you all as we channel and we reflect on the legacy of Fighting Bob LaFollette and his visionary leadership that propelled the state of Wisconsin forward. In honor of Labor Day, just want to discuss the importance of labor and union work. As we all know, Labor Day is celebrated each year to honor and to recognize the American labor movement and also the works and contributions of laborers to the development and the many achievements of this entire country. And let me tell you, labor and union workforce, it all goes hand in hand. Unions are the reason that I stand here today. I don't come from a wealthy or well-connected family, but I do come from a proud union home. And even those who have never been members of a labor union have certainly benefited from the strides made by the labor movement. Now, my dad worked third shift on an assembly line. My mother was a public school teacher, both very active in their respective unions. Their jobs were our ticket to the middle class. As we all know, unions are the foundation of our economy and of the businesses that call Wisconsin home. I'm here to tell you that we're all so much stronger when our workforce is strong. We're all stronger when working people are healthy. We're all stronger when working people are empowered to organize and negotiate for a better future. Because unions aren't just good for workers, as I said, they're good for businesses and our entire economy. Good working conditions equal more empowered and more productive workers. And also, when you have good working conditions, you're able to attract and retain more talent. And that couldn't be more important right now. We see many issues with people not wanting to go back to the workforce, going back to jobs that didn't necessarily treat them fair or respect them. Now, people don't want handouts. People just want a fair shot to work hard and to be able to get ahead. People want to be able to earn a good living without putting themselves in harm's way. People want to be able to put food on the table and to provide for your families. People want to be justly compensated, to maybe go on vacation occasionally, because look, you work hard, you deserve it. Now, Republicans, unfortunately, in the legislature have spent years trying to decimate the strength of our labor unions, but while Wisconsin workers have faced unprecedented attacks, I'm excited by the opportunities that we have looking forward. I believe that our future is brighter than our past because unions are getting stronger with each passing day. Every day, more people are stepping up. People are organizing all across this country to fight for better working conditions and also a fair shot at success, the fair shot that they deserve and have been denied. Now, as your Lieutenant Governor, I've had the privilege of going to Washington, D.C. last year to commemorate the March on Washington. I've also had many other opportunities to chat with working people from many different industries, many different professions and disciplines, and many different union members about their work, their lives, their livelihood. Now, I'm incredibly proud of how our administration has and will always stand with working families. So I just want to say one word to sum it all up. You know what that word is. It's solidarity. It's the word that guides us. It's the word that moves us. It's the word that will protect our future. Thank you all so much for having me, and I hope to see you in person soon.
See, you want to speak at another level? You got to be willing to love at another level, forgive at another level, show up at another level, speak up at another level. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth Conniff, Editor-in-Chief of Wisconsin Examiner and Editor-at-Large for the Progressive Magazine, and I'm glad to be here with you for Fighting Bob Fest 2022. I don't have to tell you that as we approach the midterms, the stakes are very high this year. And I say this as someone who's watching state politics closely in a swing state where election deniers are flexing their muscles. The most powerful Republican in Wisconsin, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, nearly lost his primary to a Trump-backed challenger, Adam Steen, who hammered him for not pulling off the legally impossible feat of recalling Wisconsin's electoral votes for Joe Biden. Our U.S. Senator Ron Johnson tried to deliver Wisconsin's fake electoral ballots for Trump to Vice President Pence. That fell apart, of course. And one reason the leaders of the GOP and our legislature are in trouble is because they've really tried to have it both ways. Creating a discredited and embarrassing investigation of what Vos called widespread fraud in the 2020 election, he also drew the line at the ridiculous notion pushed by Trump that he could change the results. It turns out there's no middle ground on the big lie. The MAGA Republicans who buy into it are high on conspiracy fantasies and sure the whole system is rigged. And now Adam Steen, Vos's challenger, is giving him fits running as a write-in candidate in the general election. And the Democrats who hadn't planned to run a challenger are now running a write-in candidate in that race too. After all, Vos, the powerful assembly leader, is also the architect of the most gerrymandered map in the country, which has locked in Republican rule in a state where Democrats won all statewide races in 2018. What does this tell us about the national bigger political picture this year? For one thing, a lot is happening at the state level. Whether it's women's rights to abortion, which have been summarily eliminated in Wisconsin after the fall of Roe v. Wade, when we reverted to an 1849 abortion ban passed 70 years before women even got the right to vote, or whether you're worried about voting rights and democracy itself, as our state and others remake election rules and make it harder for people to cast their ballots. Another thing about this year, neither party really knows where to stand in the shifting political landscape. We have the Democratic Party running away from its president, Joe Biden, who's run the most effective pro-labor White House in history, according to the president of the AFL-CIO, and who's just passed historic climate legislation and student debt relief. Yet the Democrats can't make up their minds to embrace him. He's too old, he's not centrist enough, he's too centrist. The criticism is coming from all sides. We really need our team to pull together, and instead we have calculation and cynicism. The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee even poured millions into MAGA Republicans in the primary because they thought they'd be easy to beat. It doesn't get more cynical than that. We really can't afford that kind of thinking. The stakes could not be higher. It's been great to hear Biden calling out the attacks on democracy and calls for violence and racism from Trump and his MAGA minions. As progressives, we need to pull together, vote, and join the fight. I remember reporting on a group of Republican women who gathered on a yacht during the 1996 Republican National Convention to lament the fact that the anti-abortion extremists and religious right had taken over their party platform. Face it, you got your butts out-organized, one woman said. The right has played a very long game to get to this point, destroying labor rights, exacerbating inequality, dividing voters with social issues so they abandon their own economic interests in favor of beating up on people they don't like. But after all those decades of organizing, the right is now a mess, having achieved its goals. It turns out Americans don't want to live under right-wing religious rule. We don't want to go back to the 19th century. We're appalled by the destruction of Roe v. Wade and a gun lobby that insists we must tolerate occasional massacres at movie theaters and grocery stores and elementary schools because we can't have any limits on gun rights. The right is out of touch and falling apart, and we need to seize this moment to out-organize them. Support for labor is at an all-time high. A generation of young people are aware that the live and let die capitalist system isn't working for them. And it turns out that Joe Biden is surprisingly a great champion for progressive organizing and progressive values. And a canny politician who knows how to get things done. That gives us an important start. So as we focus our organizing efforts on what's happening at the state and local level with an eye on the bigger picture, which is quite simply to save our country and our democracy and our world. Thank you.
Hey, this is Dave Zirin, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my book, The Kaepernick Effect, Taking a Knee, Changing the World. So first and foremost, I think we have to have a shared agreement that sports and politics do in fact mix, and that there's a long history of athletic resistance that speaks to this reality. This is why we can't think of the civil rights movement without thinking about Jackie Robinson, or the 1960s without people like Muhammad Ali, Tommy Smith, or John Carlos, or the women's liberation struggles of the 1970s without thinking of Billie Jean King. And today, that struggle of women, Black and brown folks, people with disabilities, trans athletes, lives on. It lives on. And of course, just as with Jackie Robinson, it's impossible to imagine the period of the civil rights movement without Jackie. Also today, it's impossible to imagine the Black Lives Matter movement without the image of Colin Kaepernick first sitting and then taking that fateful knee. But the Colin Kaepernick story actually begins almost exactly 10 years ago. And that's when Trayvon Martin was murdered in Sanford, Florida by George Zimmerman. Now, there were mass protests after this took place in the state of Florida, and responding to those protests, the Miami Heat actually posed with hoodies on in solidarity with Trayvon Martin and his family. And that was LeBron James, that was Dwayne Wade. And when this happened, that's what really unleashed a whole era that we've seen of athletic revolt and protest, the likes of which we really haven't seen since the 1960s and 1970s. And as part of that broader history, you've got Colin Kaepernick. Now, Colin Kaepernick, in the summer of 2016, was somebody who was very upset by some of the police murders that had been taking place in this country, particularly ones that had been caught on camera. People with names like Alton Sterling, Philando Castile. I mean, they were killed in front of people, a public show of violence and racism. And in response to that, athletes started to protest. And WNBA athletes were really the first ones to protest over that summer. But then it was Colin Kaepernick. Now, why is it we remember this Kaepernick protest so much? Why has it been able to stand already the test of time? I mean, it's been 6 years and it's still a reference point. The first and most obvious reason was that there was a movement in the streets willing to support and connect with him. But it's more than that. The NFL is the closest thing to a national religion that we have in this country, and he's the quarterback. Do you know of the top 100 shows of 2021, 75 of them were NFL games? Another reason is that Kaepernick was taking on the hyper-patriotism of the NFL and turning it on its head. And I think we all know what we're talking about there, flags that are as big as the fields themselves. Kaepernick was also thumbing his nose at the labor and racial discipline that's a prerequisite for the political economy of the National Football League. This very authoritarian league was upturned because he was also exposing that racial contradiction of those who play and those who work. But the great contribution by Kaepernick to the broader struggle is that gesture, the taking of that knee, because it allowed for replication. It was like something he bequeathed to the movement. Like, if you're upset about police brutality, if you're angry in your community, if you want to start a conversation, you can do that by taking a knee on the field. And that's what my book is about, the Kaepernick effect. It's not actually about Colin Kaepernick. It's about the dozens of young athletes I interviewed from around the country who had taken a knee and what they then experienced. Now, I spoke to so many people. I spoke to like 100 kids in writing this book. And it gave me such a sense of optimism and hope, because none of them have regrets about what they did, even though it was an incredibly, incredibly difficult process for them to take that knee. They really were inspired less by Kaepernick himself and more by the idea that they were a link in a chain in a broader movement. But the real reason why they did it was because we've never had a generation in this country more diverse and less tolerant of intolerance. They are determined to write their own narrative, and that's really thrilling, especially in these difficult times. I think it's so important that people realize that hundreds, if not thousands, of athletes in this country took a knee from 2016, 2019, in that period. And this went really under-recorded. And I first started this book just to make sure this history wasn't forgotten, because this country does history so terribly. But then the summer of 2020 happened. The police murder of George Floyd happened. And we had the largest protests in the history of the United States. Think about that for a second. Summer of 2020, there were more people in the streets than any other period of protest in the history of the United States. And I called all the people that I had interviewed for the book. And what I found out was that many of them were either in the streets or organizing people to go into the streets that summer. And that really made me realize that while many roads may have led us to the summer of 2020, one of them runs straight through the athletic fields of the United States. And that, to me, is something that I think has been ignored in the sports media because they want to keep it depoliticized, and in the mainstream media that doesn't take the politics of sports seriously. But here's the facts. Sports, once again, as it has for over 100 years, acted as a weather vane to show us what way the political winds are blowing. I just hope we listen. I'm Dave Zirin. It's been wonderful to talk to you. We're going to keep fighting. Be well.
Protest will always be useful. Protest will always be important. It always seems, protest always looks futile at the time that it takes place. But protest mounts up. If they thought protest was futile, they wouldn't send the police out every time there's a demonstration. Have you noticed that, you set up a picket line of somewhere 7 people and 12 policemen show up? They must worry about protest, and because they know that small protests lead to large ones. And sure, protest isn't the only thing that can be done. I mean, there are things that are done that are more directly hurtful to the military establishment, like stopping recruitment in the high schools, and doing, and the kind of things that people have done, dramatic things, acts of civil disobedience against the war machine. There are all sorts of things that people can do, but protest is part of it. I mean, when on February 15th, 2003, 10, 15 million people protested around the world against the war in Iraq, yes, it didn't stop the war in Iraq, but it indicated that there's millions and millions and millions of people in the world who feel a certain way, and who, even if they couldn't accomplish anything then, will accomplish something next month or next year or 2 years from now. So, no, we mustn't stop protesting, and we mustn't stop doing any of the other things that we can do.
Tom Castle, Solidarity sing-along singer for many years, and the person just starting to take this play, Joe Hill, Alive as You and Me, from Fairmont's last theater company On the Road. This is one of Joe's songs. It's a great sing-along. You just kind of echo the words in the chorus, and at the end we all get to shout, "That's a lie." You will eat by and by, in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Long-haired preachers come out every night just to tell you what's wrong and what's right. But when asked about something to eat, they will answer in voices so sweet. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Now the Starvation Army they play, and they sing and they clap and they pray, till they got all your coin on the drum. And then they'll tell you when you're on the pump, you will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. If you fight hard for children and wife, try to make something good in this life, well, you're a sinner and a bad man, they'll tell. And when you die, you will surely go to hell. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. While working folk of all country unite, side by side for freedom we'll fight. When the world and its wealth we have gained, to those grafters will sing this refrain. You will eat by and by, when you've learned how to cook and how to fry. Chop some wood, it'll do you good. Then you'll eat in the sweet by and by, that's no lie. You will eat by and by, when you learn how to cook and how to fry. Chop some wood, it'll do you good. Then you'll eat in the sweet by and by, that's no lie. Happy Fighting Bob Fest.
Put out the fire, put out the fire, put out the fire, our house is on fire. Put out the fire, put out the fire, put out the fire, our house is on fire. We love you, we hear you, we commit to change our ways, not later, but sooner, right now, for your future. Youth can't wait, put out the fire. Women can't wait, put out the fire. Blind can't wait, put out the fire. Our house is on fire. For our children, put out the fire. And their children, put out the fire. And their children, put out the fire. Our house is on fire. For songbirds, for clean air, for the oceans and the waves. Not later, but sooner, right now, for our future. Melting glaciers, put out the fire. Rising seas, put out the fire. Bleaching coral, put out the fire. Our house is on fire. Shrinking shoreline, put out the fire. Sinking island, put out the fire. Growing dry land, put out the fire. Our house is on fire. Let bees live, let trees grow, let the snow fall where it may. Not later, but sooner, right now, for the future. Right now, for the future. Right now, we are here to put out the fire. This is how we put out the fire. Time is now, we put out the fire. Our house is on fire.
Thanks for having me here at BobFest. My name's Greg Palast, and you can tell from my hat that I'm an investigative reporter. Maybe you've seen my reports on Democracy Now!, read my reports in The Progressive or Rolling Stone or The Guardian. Maybe you've read one of my books, or seen my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. All of my investigations, my reports here for the past 20 years at BobFest have been about one topic: vote suppression, the polite word we use for shafting people of color out of their vote. Now, next month I'm going to be releasing my new film, Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman. And I want you to watch this 2-minute trailer.
So you didn't call him, but you challenged his right to vote or have his ballot challenged.
Sir, get out of my house.
Okay, I will get out of your house.
I just now.
Voter fraud.
Law enforcement is going to the houses and places of employment and making people afraid to go out and exercise their rights.
And today to come out and not be able to vote, it bothers me to my core.
My life was on the line, I could go to prison. If I just commit suicide, this will be over.
Stop voter fraud.
They raided a voter registration office and tried to send all of these college kids to jail.
Call our voter fraud hotline.
Tonight, Governor Kemp has signed that controversial election bill. He signed Senate Bill 202 last.
That doesn't mean that you get to levy a charge against thousands of people that you don't even know and get them, removed off the rolls.
Is this an attempt to remove a lot of Democrats, black people from voting?
Get out of my house now.
Where are we from? Georgia!
Are you removing black voters from the voter rolls just so you can win this election? That lady in red who threw me out of her house, and she had a shotgun, so I wasn't going to mess around with her, challenged 32,000 voters. She was one of a group of 88 vigilantes, all GOP operatives, who under a new law signed by Brian Kemp last year called SB 202, any voter can challenge an unlimited number of other voters. And when I say unlimited, I mean unlimited. The lady in red and her GOP buddies have so far challenged over 250,000 Georgians, as you can guess, almost all of them young or voters of color. Now, who gave them this list? It came from a group out of Texas called True the Vote. And where did the Texans get this list or the money? Vote suppression ain't cheap. So I traced their money back to Wisconsin, to the Bradley Foundation in Milwaukee. You may know them. They shut down all the Allen Bradley manufacturing plants, once the biggest employer in Milwaukee. After they devastated the city, they put $2 billion into fighting your right to vote. You may know their other handiwork. In 2020, in Wisconsin, the state was about to remove over 100,000 voters from something called the ERIC Purge List, the Mover List. Well, I did an analysis for the ACLU and in Wisconsin for Black Voters Matter Fund. We went through every name and found out that, ready, 39,772 people marked for exclusion from the polls were perfectly legitimate voters. Their only crime is voting while black or voting while a student. Almost everyone, and take a look at this chart, almost everyone of the attacked voters was either an African American in Milwaukee or a student in Madison. After that report was filed, your state election board took our stuff seriously. They didn't remove those voters, but then after the election they did. Now they're putting them back. It's a fight. It's a fight against the voter rolls of Wisconsin and 32 other states funded by the Milwaukee-Bradley family. If you would like to get our report on the Wisconsin purges for Black Voters Matter, go to gregpalast.com. And if you want to see that film, Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman, go to gregpalast.com, sign up, you can get the DVD and find out where we're having our showings. Thanks. This is Greg Palast.
Hello, I'm Deborah Lofgren.
And we are the Raging Grannies of Madison, Wisconsin. We are the raging grannies. We don't hide in nooks and crannies. We stand up for peace and justice, even when the police bust us. Join with the raging grannies. Time to get up off your fannies. The world needs folks to take a stand, and that's why we are grands. Follow the money to see why we go off to war. Follow the money, it's not freedom we're fighting for. Follow the money, profits aren't worth dying for. Lockheed Martin's got their billions, and they don't need more. Boeing and Raytheon, Bechtel and Koch brothers too. Reap all the profits and don't give a fig about you. Families are hungry, schools don't have funds that they need. Weapon makers turn a blind eye while the country bleeds. Follow the money, it all leads to corporate greed. The vets and the homeless, when will they get what they need? Big money interests dictate our nation's war plans. Now's the time to take back our country and give folks a helping hand. People, not profits, let's make our government see. War steals our treasure, killing cannot make us free. Follow the money, and once you have found where it leads, raise your voice, get loud and louder, singing out for peace.
Thank you, Ed Garvey. He was actually polite in the introduction. That's astonishing. Hello, Wisconsin. Good to be with you. What a joy. It just makes me happier than a red robin to come bobbing along here to Baraboo, Wisconsin for the annual Bob Fest blowout. And of course, I do come to you from Texas, no longer the state of Texas, though. Thanks to our Republican governor, who, by the way, puts the goober in gubernatorial, we are now the secessionist Republic of Republican Ridiculousness, or Absurdistan, as we call it down home. Thank you. Thank you. Joy to be back at the Baraboo with the Barrymore with you madcap Madisonians as we gather on the eve of another Baraboo Babalooza. now, as Ed indicates, in its 9th year. I mean, a decade of down and dirty democracy building. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ed Garvey. What a joy. Hello, Wisconsin. Wow. Yeah. Ed Garvey, by God. He's a little bit Irish. Have you noticed? If Ed was on the street and there was free ice cream over here, on this side of the street, and there was a fight going on over here, Ed would cross the street and say, "Is this a private fight or can anybody get in?" That's the attitude that I like. Well, it's a joy to be back with all you good folks, the Barrymore, you feisty Bob Festers who get fired up for the 10th annual Bobapalooza that we're going to have tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you so much. What a joy, what a happy night. I mean, to kick it off like this. So it's great to be back here at BobFest. Hello, Bob Festers. Just a perfect joy for me to be back with you Garvey Eastas, you wild-ass Scott Walker butt kickers, for another Bobapalooza and a full day of edification at the hands of our man Ed Garvey here, putting on the best political party in America right here in Madison, Wisconsin. You know, there's an old cowboy saying out in West Texas, "Speak the truth, but ride a fast horse." And the truth is, of course, that our government has become a wholly owned subsidiary of Wall Street and the corporate elite, who are openly supplanting our democracy with their kleptocracy, a government of thieves, of, by, and for the bankers and bosses, the big shots, bastards, and bullshitters who think that they are entitled to run roughshod over we the people. We need your feisty spirit, your hard facts and hard truths, your democratic principles and citizen action more than ever before, because there are powerful forces of plutocracy, autocracy, theocracy, and kleptocracy loose on our land, out to change America itself, change the very idea of America as a unique society trying to reach toward egalitarianism and the common good. You know, Benjamin Franklin at the start wrote that the destiny of America is not power, but light. Light. And the light he meant was the light of those values of economic fairness, social justice, equal opportunity for all people. That's the light of America. They're trying to steal our America from us. They're trying to steal those ideals of economic fairness, social justice, equal opportunity for all people. That's what they're taking from us. That's what's at stake. That's why you are so important. I'll leave you with this. Intensify your effort. In the words of Louis Grizzard, the late great Southern humorist, he pointed out something that we in the South have always known to be true, and that's that there's a great big difference between being naked and being naked. Being naked means you have no clothes on, but being naked, that means you have no clothes on and you are up to something. So let's all get naked together. Thank you very much. Glad to be with you. Thanks to BobFest. We've got to make this happen. Thank you for your support. Thank you for BobFest's feistiness. Thank you for standing up and speaking out. Thank you for daring to take on the powers that be on behalf of the powers that ought to be. You're an inspiration to all of us across this country who give a damn about this country and about this democracy. Do your part. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow at Fighting BobFest.
Thanks again, everybody, for joining us at Fighting BobFest this year. Again, a virtual Fighting BobFest, but coming to you live via the internet, on YouTube, on Facebook. Fighting BobFest has been going for more than 20 years now and will continue in the future, hopefully next year in person again. But thanks to everybody that made this event possible, all of the speakers, all of the musicians, the Barrymore Theater for opening their doors to us, and Brian Alberth and Left Effect Media for providing the video of this year's event. Again, thanks everybody for watching our Fighting BobFest 2022 tonight. Hopefully next year we'll be back all in person again here at the Barrymore Theater.